investigators that she was attacked by Alex Woodworth.
Alex Woodworth is a local substitute teacher, but when police attempt to locate him, they draw a blank.
We couldn't find him, so we decided to go out there and talk to Don Sipple and see if there was anything else that we could learn. And as I was standing on the roadway, I noticed footprints in the mud.
Detectives follow the footprints and come to an abandoned vehicle stuck in the mud. It belongs to Ezra McCandless, and slumped in the footwell of her car is the lifeless body of Alex Woodworth.
You've got a victim stabbed 16 times. This would have absolutely been a textbook case of rage killing.
I think what happened was premeditated.
This was an attack that he didn't see coming.
An ex-boyfriend of Ezra McCandless comes forward. His name is Jason Mengel.
At the same time that came about, Jason Mengel came to the police department. He mentioned that earlier in the day, he went to Racy's coffee shop, and while he was there, as he described it, she burst through the door, said that she had a crazy look in her eyes.
And we started to learn that there was a love triangle between Alex, Jason Mengel, and Ezra.
Ultimately, Ezra wanted to be with was Jason.
She needed to try and cut Alex out of the mix, and she got wrapped up in her own mind and did a horrible thing.
But Ezra McCandless is claiming self-defense. Is it even possible that she could be consumed by jealousy to the point of murder?
I think a scorned woman is definitely capable of committing some of the worst crimes there are.
Eau Claire, Wisconsin, the area is buzzing with creativity, full of trendy bars and a community of creatives who gather at Racy Delane's Coffee Lounge.
Eau Claire's been described as being a big little town, meaning in a sense it's pretty big geographically, but the people who live there all seem to know each other, and it seems to be a pretty nice place to live and build a community.
Eau Claire is a college town, so there is a younger demographic here, but there's also a lot of young families because people do come here for the college, love the community, and they'll stay here and they'll raise their families. So it's a very family-oriented place. Racy's is a coffee shop that is near campus. It's near the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire. I like to equate it as almost like a Central Perk from the show Friends. It's that cozy, that little bit of artsy, little bit of alternative, that kind of vibe. So it's a very, very welcoming, open coffee shop.
In March 2018, around 4:15 p.m., a young woman named Ezra McCandless arrives at the doorstep of dairy farmer Don Sipple in the rural area of Springbrook, Eau Claire.
At the time, when Ezra pounded on his front door, he was eating dinner. And when he opens the door, Ezra was standing there claiming to have been attacked.
County 911, what's the address of the emergency?
This is Don Sipple calling, and I have a young lady that just came to my house and somebody attacked her, and she needs a doctor. Her clothes are all torn, and...
Okay, and she's by herself?
She's by herself. She walked to my house here just recently.
She was extremely upset. She was covered in bruises. She had some blood, particularly around her mouth. And when Don Sipple was just trying to get some basic information from her, she really couldn't remember anything that had happened to her. She didn't know who attacked her. She just kept saying she's hurting everywhere and she needed help.
She gets transferred to Mayo Hospital here in Eau Claire. Officer Corey Reeves goes and talks to her, and then Ezra is admitted into the hospital for her safety and to make sure she's okay from this traumatic incident.
I went to the hospital to speak with Deputy Shields and to help interview Ezra in her emergency room. And she provided the name Monica Carlin to Deputy Shields, so there was some issues trying to get an actual identification on her. Monica Carlin was her name before, and then she had it legally changed to Ezra McCandless.
Not only is there confusion over Ezra McCandless's name, but detectives also discover she has had a challenging childhood.
She's a 19-year-old teenage girl that dropped out of college who ended up in Eau Claire because life sort of drifted her there. She was born to a teen mom. Her mom was just 14 years old when she got pregnant and gave birth to Ezra. So that's, from the beginning, just a really hard way to grow up and to start your life. So the struggles early on were definitely there for Ezra, being born to such a young mother. And it sort of seemed to want to start somewhere fresh in life and really create her own identity. Ezra was a very artistic person. She enjoyed the creative side to herself, and she even used her own car, a Chevy Impala, to be sort of her canvas.
Sergeant Corey Reeves conducts an interview with Ezra McCandless.
She was curled up in a hospital bed. She had the blanket pulled up to her face. Really, the only part of her that I could see was her nose and her eyes, and she was essentially in the fetal position on the bed until I came in and tried to talk to her. At that point, she sat up on the bed. She started rocking back and forth. She still had the blankets up by her mouth. She repeated several times, "It was dark and scary." She didn't have a great memory about what had happened or where she was that day.
She was crying, but didn't see any tears. There were cuts in her pants to where you could see cuts into her body, into her flesh. The words boy were carved in her arm. And she had first said that Alex Woodworth was the one who did it.
She said she was sitting in the passenger seat. Alex was sitting in the driver's seat, and he reached over, held her arm down, and took out a knife, and then carved the word boy into her arm. And she said that's what he referred to me as his boy.
This turned out to be very significant to the story and to the investigation because come to find out that when Ezra was younger, when she was in high school, she experienced a lot of gender identity issues. She struggled with thinking whether she was a male or she was a female, and she really struggled with how not only she identified herself, but also how she wanted other people to identify her. So having the word boy carved into her arm was really sort of significant of the gender issues that she experienced younger in her life.
Boy was written from starting at the elbow was the letter B, and down to the wrist was the Y. And it was written as if it was done with the right hand. If Alex would have done it, it would have been completely backwards. It would have been, the B would have been at the wrist, and the Y would have been up at the elbow. So that didn't make sense.
Ezra requests that her ex-boyfriend, Jason Mengel, come to the hospital. Detectives then interview Mengel at the police department.
Jason mentioned that he was in the military, that he was deployed fairly often for training. He talked about his relationship with Ezra a little bit. He was 33 years old, she was 19 years old. They dated on and off again for 9 months. He said that they would refer to each other as husband and wife, even though they weren't actually married. More recently, he'd been deployed, and Ezra told him that she no longer wanted to be with him. He said he was sad about this, but that they continued to communicate with each other. He learned that she started seeing Alex. He knew that she dated him before, and he mentioned that earlier in the day, he went to Racy's coffee shop, and while he was there, as he described it, she burst through the door, said that she had a crazy look in her eyes. He tried to talk to her. She basically just shrugged him off. I believe she wanted to meet with Alex to talk to him. She wanted to get a hat back from his apartment and then was out the door.
Jason decided to ride his bicycle to Alex's house. And that's when he saw Ezra's car parked out front and started sort of pacing back and forth in front of Alex's house, waiting for Ezra or Alex to come outside. And after about 45 minutes of waiting, he decided to go into Alex's house himself to make sure everything was okay, because his conversation and interaction with Ezra was just seemed off earlier that day. Now, according to Jason, they were deep in conversation, seemed okay, maybe an intense conversation. So Jason decided to go back outside, where he was confronted with the police.
Somebody else called in a suspicion complaint on Jason standing there watching from a distance. Eau Claire Police Department arrived. Jason explained to them why he was there and what he was doing, and that he was concerned because Ezra was kind of not in the right state of mind.
I was paranoid because she had fucking like fire in her eyes.
Okay.
So
Who's the girlfriend?
Ezra McCandless.
Okay.
I was just worried because, like...
Was the door standing open over there when you got there on the car?
I knocked like 3 times. I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear a scuffle or anything. So, knocked, yelled, opened the door, and I heard her say, "Let him help you. Let him help you." So then I said, "Hey, is everything okay? Is everyone all right now?" I mean, I'm a medic in the military, so, like, I was paranoid. I was paranoid that someone was going to do something irrational.
Okay. And they're in the house on the corner here, or?
Yeah, they're on the, I think they're fine, though. I mean, I don't know. I'm just...
I just saw the door to the car was standing open, too.
Yeah, I wanted to turn her car off. Her car was running, so that's why I was, like, worried, because it was running, and I was like, okay, what's going on? Like, what's going on? Is everything okay?
Okay.
I don't think he's dangerous, but I don't know.
Do you know what his name is?
Alex Woodsworth?
Okay.
I think it's Woodsworth or Woodsworth.
Eventually, Eau Claire Police Department goes across the street and talks to Ezra and Alex, and kind of finds out what's going on. They kind of blow it off, and they get in their vehicle, Ezra's vehicle, and leave. And Jason's kind of left to, he actually has a conversation with them before they leave. I think Jason truly had a concern, what Ezra was up to that day.
But the burning question remains, with Ezra McCandless continuing to claim assault. Where is Alex Woodsworth? In 2018, Ezra McCandless arrives at a rural farm in Wisconsin, Eau Claire. Covered in blood, she is disoriented and unable to recall the details of her ordeal, but asserts that she was assaulted by her partner, Alex Woodworth. McCandless's ex-boyfriend Jason informs detectives that he had seen Alex earlier that day and that he and Alex had spoken. Detectives are currently unaware of Alex Woodworth's whereabouts and are actively working to locate him.
I remember sitting in our conference room and we were saying to each other, like, well, where is Alex in this? Because police officers had contact with Alex, and we're starting to get concerned because she's in a condition that will lead us to believe that it's possible that something happened, and we can't find Alex. We started doing our work by contacting family. I remember calling Alex's mom. He's checked out all the locations where he might be. According to his mom, I think one was the coffee shop, Racy Delaney's. Another one was the Joint, which is a tavern. And then the other one was his house on Cameron Street.
I went to Alex's house on Cameron Street in Eau Claire. He wasn't there. His roommate was there. His roommate didn't know where he was. His roommate tried calling Alex. Alex's phone went straight to voicemail. After that, we basically ran out of leads.
During the course of the investigation and interviewing people about Alex, everyone we talked to said he was a gentle person. He cared for Ezra. He loved Ezra. He, according to people, never in a fight, never harm anybody, willing to help everybody, loved everybody. If he was going to fight, it was going to be with words. He was going to school to become a philosopher and teach philosophy. That's what his dream was.
It wasn't until later that night that I went back to the police department and had a discussion with my commanding officer and expressed some concerns about Alex's whereabouts and the fact that we couldn't find Ezra's vehicle. Ezra remembered something about a frog statue. She mentioned Owen Park. Eau Claire has a statue tour where they rotate statues, part of a sculpture competition. And at that point, I remember that there was a frog statue in Owen Park. And she told me that she was at Owen Park sometime between 1 and 4 o'clock. I checked the cameras, and I never saw her vehicle or her enter or exit the park.
Unable to obtain a precise timeline from McCandless, the detectives decide to revisit Don Sippel's farm in Springbrook.
We kind of all determined that it's going to be worthwhile for us to head out to that farm, because if this girl's walking down a county road barefoot, covered in mud, possibly some blood on her, and in the condition that she was in, somebody probably saw her, even though it's a rural area and people drive up and down the roads there. So we were surprised that she had supposedly walked all the way up to this farmhouse and hadn't been seen by anybody. Our thoughts were she couldn't have come from very far, because if she had, there would have been other calls, this girl walking down the street. So we decided to go out there and talk to Don Sippel and kind of look around a little bit and see what, kind of get a lay of the land and see if there was anything else that we could learn. We knew what kind of car she had. We knew that her Chevy Impala was very distinctive. She had done a lot of artwork, I guess you could say, drawing on the vehicle. So it was very easy to identify. It's white, so it should stick out. As that's happening, I stayed down on the road, which was a pretty good distance from the house. I'd say maybe 100 yards. As I was sitting there, I got out of my vehicle. I was just bored because they were up doing the interview, and I wanted to look around and see if there was anything maybe in the ditches along the road that she might have dropped. As I was doing that, I could see a farm access road that went off to the south, off of the road that I was on. Springtime, so there's a lot of mud and water runoff. And as I was standing on the roadway, I noticed footprints in the mud. As I got closer and looked at them, I could see that the footprints were not shoe impressions. They were, clearly a barefoot or a socked foot. So I called Detective Prock, and as they were interviewing Mr. Sippel, and I just said, hey, I got some footprints here in the mud. I think we need to investigate this further. And they were close enough in distance to the Sippel house that it's entirely possible she made it from that road to his house without a car going by. So we thought that these are probably her footprints coming out of the woods. So I waited for the other detectives to come down. I had some binoculars in my detective vehicle, and we started making our way up the dirt road and kind of crested a hill, and we could see Ezra's vehicle. My binoculars, I could see that the vehicle was stuck in some mud, probably 100 yards, 200 yards away. And there's a bunch of stuff outside the vehicle, like just random things from your car that looked like they were kind of just strewn about on the ground around the vehicle. And I could see what appeared to be the upper torso of a human body sticking out the back driver's side open door of the vehicle.
They took video and photographs as they walked into the area where this vehicle was located. An old military-type trailer that was parked back in there in this area. So this vehicle stuck in the mud, Chevy Impala, all painted very odd things on the outside of their vehicle. The painting on her vehicle was a bird riding a bicycle on the roof of her car that she apparently had painted herself.
The upper half of his body was hanging out the rear driver's side door. The lower half of his body was in the footwell of the rear driver's side. He was clearly deceased. Looked like he had a scarf around his neck. We also noticed that there was blood outside, and we could see that there's a bunch of items that were probably in the car scattered around.
There was a pillow laying there with like a fox, the face of a fox on it, and a muddy footprint on that pillow, a deer antler laying there next to the head of this victim, until we looked into it a little bit more, and obviously there was significantly more wounds than what a deer antler would cause, and a pair of boots laying there all bloody. Turned out they had blood on them, but and eventually find out those were Ezra McCandless's boots that were laying there in the middle of where this crime had taken place.
The victim is confirmed as 24-year-old Alex Woodworth, and his body is taken for an autopsy.
There was 16 different stab and slice wounds identified on him. We could identify, just from the initial photos, 3 different slices on his throat and multiple stab wounds, mostly on his left side and his rib cage, lower abdomen, right about his belt line. Most of his injuries were around his neck, his back, his sides, the groin, but nothing really on his forearms or on the palms of his hands, a defensive manner. He didn't put up a fight, is what it would tell us, that he was either attacked unsuspectingly. Me personally, if somebody's attacking me with a knife, they're gonna have one heck of a fight on their hands. And it didn't appear that he probably defended himself very much.
Alex, unfortunately, would have been alive for probably a significant amount of time after the attack. The medical examiner later on determined that none of the stab wounds in and of themselves were fatal. So based on that evidence, he likely survived for a good amount of time. Again, we have the evidence of the scarf being wrapped around his neck, possibly as a way to try to stop the bleeding. And we know that his body was found half outside of the car. So was Ezra trying to put him back in the car? Was that his way of trying to escape and maybe try to get some help? But he definitely suffered. It wasn't a quick death.
Detectives move forward with a follow-up interview with McCandless, seeking to unravel the mystery behind the brutal killing. Is this 19-year-old woman an innocent victim, or is this story more sinister than it appears? In 2018, Ezra McCandless arrives at a rural Springbrook farm in Wisconsin, but is marked with the word boy superficially cut into her arm. Despite her claims of an attack by her lover, Alex Woodworth, she is unable to recall the details.
March 24th of 2018, Dunn County asked that I assist with the interview of Ezra, mainly because I've already have rapport with her. I've talked to her at this time a handful of times about her previous cases. So I meet with her again at the hospital. We go into a conference room and I have her sit by the door and tell her, you're free to leave at any time. We just need to talk about what happened, trying to fill in the blanks. And so we sit and talk. And eventually I inform her that we have found Alex and her car. It was kind of shock. And so as we were talking, she started talking about how Alex came, she was in the car got stuck, and Alex came from behind her, and Alex tried cutting her pants off, and that's where the cuts in her pants were from. And then she also said the same thing about the cuts on her shirt, that he was trying to cut her shirt off.
He kept trying to grab me in the back of the car, so I just started to defend myself as fast as I could.
You said you had the knife. Where were you cutting him?
I just was going anywhere and everywhere I could.
Okay.
He just kept grabbing me and grabbing me and grabbing me.
The reason she said that she stabbed him so much was to get him to stop, because she said he kept on attacking her, and so she needed to stab him to stop him, because that's what her dad told her to do. We were able to figure out the knife was actually given to her from her father, that she had it in her car for defense. And after the incident took place, the stabbing of Alex, she took the knife with her, and the knife was eventually found in the ditch away from the car. She talked about how she tried to grab the knife of the blade to get it from her, and that's where the cut on her hands came from. And then she said that as they were in the car, she was fighting with him. He ended up dropping the knife, and that's when she was able to get a hold of the knife, and she stabbed him. If it's a defensive wound, and even think about it, if you're gonna grab a knife, it's not gonna be just like a little grab. You're gonna grab onto that, and if it's a sharp knife and if someone pulls it, it's gonna cut your hand wide open. And hers were as if you took your nail and scratched it across your palm of your hand a couple times. They were very superficial, no stitches. Basically, they put Band-Aids on them. And these were all documented by the emergency room doctor. And he even called them self-inflicted. And they weren't traumatic, they weren't inflicted by somebody else. No one's gonna sit there and let someone carve a word into them and not be moving their arm, fighting or that. The lines were too perfectly straight. So once I confronted her with that, she admitted that she carved the word boy into her arm. When we pressed it, she said, "I just wanted to remember." And that was it.
He didn't do that to you, did he? You carved the boy into your own arm. Is that right?
This was a shock to the community. This was not something that anyone had really experienced or heard about. And especially as more of the details of the case started to become public, when you're talking about the age of the victim, when you're talking about the age of Ezra, this really was something that rocked this community. I don't think anyone wants to think that a 19-year-old small stature female is capable of something like this. I think as a society, we just don't want to think they're capable of that.
Upon confessing to detectives that she disposed of the murder weapon, investigators study the evidence at the crime scene and observe additional discrepancies in her initial account.
We eventually started to piece it together that her story's BS. It's not making sense, and based off from his injuries, the one that really sticks in my mind is the 3 distinct cut wounds across his throat. That's not self-defense. That's fully intentionally of killing somebody. Stabbing somebody in the groin, in the lower abdomen, in the left side, in the back. There was clear intent to kill somebody with those wounds. There's different theories. Did she try and get Alex after she stabbed him to death and slit his throat 3 times? Did she try and get him back into the car and try and get her car out of there to move the scene? Did he get in the car himself?
The biggest part of the investigation would have taken place right there in and around Ezra's car. Not just where Alex's body was discovered in the back seat, but also looking around the car. And I think during the course of the investigation, that's where they uncovered the most amount of evidence that seemed to contradict her story. For instance, finding the majority of Alex's blood outside of the car. Finding the blood outside the car is pretty telling because Ezra's story was that they were interacting inside of the car, and that's where she claimed to have stabbed him in self-defense. Well, that's problematic because investigators found the majority of the amount of blood outside of the car. If she was telling the truth about her story, the blood should have been found inside the car.
There's a bloody footprint on the roof of the car at an angle that just doesn't make sense. So obviously we know that Alex didn't put the muddy footprint on the ceiling of the car. That had to have come from Ezra because her boots were off and her socks were muddy. So, did she try and drag Alex into the car to try and get the car moved and move the scene of the homicide so it wasn't discovered there? I think there was a significant time there that she really went, oh, what am I gonna do now? He's dead in my car, I can't move my car. And I think there was, maybe up to several hours that she sat there trying to figure out how to spin this tale and causing injuries to herself to make it look like she was attacked, that she didn't want to jab herself or stab herself significantly to cause herself too many wounds, so really all of her injuries were superficial scratches. So I think she spent a significant amount of time there after Alex was dead.
She took Alex's cell phone with him. She didn't have a cell phone of her own. Now, when investigators asked her what happened to Alex's cell phone because it wasn't with him inside the car, she originally said that she took it so she could call for help. But that was discovered later on to not be true because the cell phone was found broken, and which Ezra later claimed she fell, and that's how Alex's cell phone eventually broke. But there's no evidence suggesting that Ezra ever used Alex's phone to try to get help. If Ezra would have just walked away, it would have absolutely been prevented. Or even after the attack, if she would have just used Alex's cell phone to dial 911 and even say that she made a mistake, he probably would have survived, and we wouldn't be talking about a murder.
But what is the underlying motive behind the murder of Alex?
We want to find out what led up to this, like what caused this incident to occur. Was this self-defense? Was there a fight that occurred? Was there any kind of motive that she might have had for this to happen? We interviewed family, friends of both Ezra and Alex, some of Alex's professors, Alex's friends and family, and we started to learn that there was a kind of like a love triangle between Alex, Jason Mengel, and Ezra. We started to paint a picture that, Ezra was struggling. When you take all those things and put them together with the total picture here, to me, we were just dealing with a deeply disturbed woman who had an affinity for Jason Mengel to the point that she was willing to murder Alex Woodworth.
Ezra is someone that can pretty easily manipulate people. I think Ezra comes across as being this sweet, nice, artsy, creative young girl, but deep down, I don't really think that's who she is. But I think she's able to use that to manipulate people and to get people to like her and give her what she wants. But I think she can easily turn into a very different person when she's threatened. I don't think Ezra had it in her to ever walk away from this situation. I don't think she was ever willing to walk away from any of these relationships that she had with any of these people, because that would mean the attention was being taken away from her. And I don't think she's the type of person that's gonna walk away from that.
All signs indicate that this was a surprise attack, driven by the desperation to control a love triangle gone wrong, with tragic consequences. In 2018, Ezra McCandless arrives at a rural Springbrook farm in Wisconsin, injured, bloodied, and bearing a superficial cut on her arm with the inscription, "Boy." She claims that her lover, Alex Woodworth, restrained her and inflicted the injuries, but this statement is later proven false. Shortly thereafter, Alex Woodworth's lifeless body is found in the same area, with 16 stab wounds and no defensive injuries. This leads investigators to consider it an attack driven by a jealous desire to separate Alex from her relationship with Jason Mengel. Contrary to McCandless's version of events, the evidence discovered at the crime scene contradicts her narrative.
I think the impact of the local community was a little bit of shock because they were seen around the community. They were at Racy's, they were at the Joint, they were at all of these places where the art community hung out, where a lot of people hung out. And so people had known them and recognized them. So I think the community seeing that was quite shocking. Obviously never know what's going on when, a person's life next to you, but that all of this was going on, that was unsettling.
The Racy's community was thrilled. They wanted her gone, they wanted her away. That's a very tight-knit group of friends, community there, and they were in shock, they were saddened. Everyone loved Alex. They wanted Alex back, but unfortunately we couldn't do that. So the next best thing was her gone. They didn't want to see her ever again. And on April 6th, 2018, Ezra was arrested for first-degree intentional homicide. She was taken from the hospital and went to Dunn County Jail.
Detectives gather the evidence to prepare for trial.
She lawyered up. There wasn't much of an opportunity to talk to her much more other than her initial couple stories after she was confronted with finding her vehicle and Alex's body. Her family got an attorney involved right away and secured an attorney for her, and so there wasn't much of an opportunity to interview her anymore. The physical evidence kind of spoke for itself, but there also was a lot of questions about the physical evidence that we couldn't answer, like how did Alex end up in the car, Only Ezra knows that because Alex can't speak for himself anymore. So I think we're pretty confident in our investigation going into this, not knowing exactly what her defense attorney is going to claim at trial. But as an agency, I think we felt pretty comfortable. I think the DA, the prosecuting attorney, felt pretty comfortable going into this case with what we had. We had expert testimony lined up to show that these injuries to her were self-inflicted. It's a large, many pieces of a puzzle that you got to try and put together, present to the DA. The DA has to try and tell this story to a jury and convince them that what we have discovered through our investigation proves that she, intentionally murdered him.
By October 2018, when the case went to trial and Ezra was charged with first-degree intentional murder, she surprisingly didn't show any remorse. I think she went into that trial still trying to play the victim in all of this, and she was determined to stick to her original story. It does not surprise me at all to find out that Ezra decided to take the stand in her own defense. Although most criminal defendants choose not to, the reason why it doesn't surprise me is because, by all accounts, Ezra liked the attention. She liked to be the star. She liked to be the center of everyone's attention. And I think by taking the stand and being able to tell her story directly from her mouth, I think she really enjoyed that. And I think she also thought that it was going to be a way for her to continue on this narrative and continue the lies that she had laid into foundation. She pretty much stuck to her original version that this was self-defense, that Alex was the one who had come on to her, that he had physically gotten on top of her, that he had a knife in his hand and he tried to cut her clothes off. And she basically saw no other way to get out of this in order to protect herself than to stab and defend herself. And I think she really wanted to portray herself in front of the jury as being this meek, sort of timid, friendly young girl. And I think she thought she was going to be able to use that to her advantage, because no jury is going to want to convict someone who looks and acts like Ezra McCandless did.
The sheer brutality of Alex's injuries in relation to the lack of injuries on Ezra. That would be the thing to me, looking back on it, that if I were looking at this as a juror and I was seeing that this woman walked away from this with no broken bones, very little in the way of actual injuries, some superficial stuff. But then you look at Alex and he's stabbed a countless number of times, many of which could have been fatal, and by somebody who was 30, 40 pounds smaller than he was. To me, that was the biggest piece right there, is just the brutality of it, and what I would say was probably the most important piece here.
I know the public opinion was that she appeared as though this wasn't so impactful for her. I think the jury made some comments that she did not seem remorseful about what she did. My understanding is that she wore her hair in different ways every single day that the trial went on, that it seemed like she was enjoying the attention that she was getting surrounding the trial. I had heard that when Jason was testifying, that she almost seemed like she was trying to get his attention while he was testifying, that she wore a sweater that he gave to her. Without having spoken to him, I guess I can't say too much about how he feels. I'm sure it's a mix of emotions between guilt and just sadness and confusion. He was very close with Ezra. I imagine that when you're calling someone your wife and they're referring to you as your husband, and then you find out that they stab someone to death, and then watch a trial take place and watch them get convicted of homicide, that's got to be very jarring. And again, like many other people involved in this case, I'm sure he took him a while to cope with everything that was happening.
She got all giddy and girlish looking at him. She got kind of all flustered, and I thought that was very bizarre. She wasn't believable. And obviously a 3-hour deliberation on a first-degree intentional homicide case by a jury, they didn't find her believable.
On November 1st, 2019, Ezra McCandless is convicted of first-degree intentional homicide for the murder of 24-year-old Alex Woodworth. She is later sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 50 years served.
I think she was in shock. I truly think that she thought she was going home at the end of the day. And she just stood there kind of stone-faced. She said she was sorry. She was sorry to the family and that she loved Alex very much. I don't think the judge believed her. I mean, you stab someone 16 times and leave them to die. You didn't try to help them. You didn't call anyone to help them. You left them.
I think that comes down to how she testified, how she acted in the courtroom, the evidence that was there. I think that, they looked and examined from all sides, and they found her guilty.
Alex's parents, specifically his father, have publicly said that they do forgive Ezra for what she's done. Of course, forgiveness isn't gonna bring their son back, but it probably helps them sleep a little bit better at night and helps them live with a sense of peace to be able to forgive her.
I actually look back on it and I'm proud of the work that we did, in the sense that somebody was eventually gonna find that car and they were gonna find Alex. But what evidence would have been lost as a result? How long would it have taken to find him? Maybe the knife's never recovered. Maybe the phone's never recovered. Footprint washes away. All this evidence that could have been lost. So I'm proud of the work that we as a team did that day. We kept working on it. It's very sad for the Woodworth family, but again, I like to think that because of the work we did that day, we were able to, save some evidence potentially that was able to be used at trial later on. So I think it's a fair sentence based on the crime.
I think in this case there is closure. We found out what happened. Again, based on the evidence, we found out what happened. I think the evidence told the whole story, whether or not Ezra wanted to tell the truth about what happened. And if I was a family member and Alex was someone that I cared about closely, I would feel some closure after this case. Yeah, she would be in prison for a very long time, or potentially the rest of her life, and wouldn't be capable of doing something like this to somebody else ever again.
A life taken, a community grieving and in shock. But there is some small sense of peace and knowing that McCandless's jealousy won't claim another life.